I have always taken up space on church pews, in family photos, at the front of the grocery line with 2 carts and a coupon book that made the cashier sigh. I'm a big woman with dark skin like polished walnut, long hair I twist into braids on Sundays, and a laugh that carries down the hall before I do. People remember me. But the year I got pregnant, folks tried to shrink me down to nothing more than a medical risk and a bad decision. The first time I saw the little flicker on the ultrasound, no bigger than a firefly trapped in a jar, I cried right there on that paper-covered table. I whispered, "Hi, baby," like I was afraid to scare the light away. The tech smiled, polite but tight, the way people do when they've already decided how your story should end. By the time my obstetrician walked in, I'd become statistics on a clipboard. Age 36, plus size, borderline hypertensive, history of anemia. He didn't ask me about names or morning sickness or whether I wanted music in the delivery room. He cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk about realistic outcomes." Realistic outcomes meant the worst. It meant a pamphlet with glossy photos of worried couples and the word options printed in a soft, forgiving font. It meant the sentence I will never forget. Given your health profile, termination may be the safest course. I stared at the grainy print of my baby, a constellation of pixels in a dark universe, and felt something ancient in me rise like a wave. "No," I said, quietly at first, then stronger. "No." He blinked. "We can revisit this after more tests." "We won't," I said. "I heard you the first time. Now hear me." I left the office shaking, clutching the stack of papers they'd slipped into my hands, just in case. Outside, the sun was sticky and fierce, July heat curling the edges of the flyers on the clinic bulletin board. I sat in my car, turned off the radio, and cried so hard my chest hurt. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I knew the fight had started. The fight wasn't only with doctors. It was with my own people, folks who loved me, but were scared. When I told my mama, she put a hand over her mouth and whispered, "Lord, protect my child." She didn't say the word, but I heard it anyway. Dangerous. My older sister, who keeps a calendar for everything, said, "We need a plan, Denise. Worst-case scenarios, emergency contacts, pre-register at the hospital." My cousin Sherry, who never learned the art of whispering, sent a voice note that said, "Girl, you know this ain't wise." I understood their fear. I carried it too. I Googled things at 2 in the morning that made my hands go cold. Preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, emergency C-sections. I bought a blood pressure cuff and a giant water bottle and a notebook where I wrote down every fruit and vegetable like it was a prayer bead. And still, every appointment tightened into the same hard conversation. My body as a problem to be solved by erasing the life inside it. At church, the whispers wore perfume. "Bless her heart," someone murmured behind me, which in our community is just a silk ribbon on a brick. One sister pulled me aside and said, "You know the Lord helps those who help themselves." I wanted to ask her if she'd ever seen a mustard seed, how small it is, how faith can live inside a speck and still move a mountain, how mine was learning to move one named fear. My boyfriend, then not yet my husband, wasn't a villain, just a practical man raised by practical people. He sat at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet he'd printed and said, "Let's be logical. Medical bills. Your hours at work. What if something happens?" His mouth said numbers. His eyes said he was scared to lose me. I reached across the table, placed his hand on my belly, and said, "Something already happened. There's a heartbeat." We didn't solve anything that night, but he held me while I fell asleep. One arm under my neck, the other across my stomach like a promise. The first trimester rolled me like a storm. Smells became weapons. I'd walk into the grocery store and gag at the fruit display like the oranges had sinned against me. I fell asleep at 6 in the evening, sitting upright on the couch, a bowl of cereal cooling in my hand like an abandoned moon. But underneath the nausea and the exhaustion was this steady drum. "I chose you, baby. I choose you every day." At my 12-week checkup, they sent me to a high-risk specialist for additional counseling. The waiting room was cold and spotless. The magazines neatly fanned out like no actual pregnant woman had ever flipped them in panic. A nurse with kind eyes took my vitals and said, "You're brave." I wanted to tell her I wasn't brave. I was stubborn. I was tired. I was a big girl with a bigger faith and a spine that didn't like being told to bow. But I just nodded. Brave would have to do. The specialist spoke softly, like you do around people who might shatter. She showed me charts, percentages, words that clanged. Morbidity, morbidity, morbidity. She said, "We support whatever you decide, but you should know all the risks." I took a breath that felt like I was borrowing air from my future self and said, "Can we also talk about all the things we can do to keep us safe? Not just the ways we fail?" For the first time, someone met me in the middle. We made a plan, not a pamphlet. Nutrition consult, gentle movement, aspirin protocol my OB should have mentioned but didn't. More frequent monitoring. Referral to a doula who had worked with bodies like mine and knew how to advocate when the room got loud with opinions. I left with a calendar full of appointments and a feeling I hadn't had in weeks. Hope, wearing a lab coat. The doula's name was Joy, and yes, that is the Lord's sense of humor. She was a dark-skinned woman with silver locks and the kind of hug that makes your shoulders remember how to relax. She sat on my couch, kicked off her shoes like an auntie, and said, "Tell me what you want." No one had asked me that. Not the, "How are you really you?" The vision. The day. The sound of the room you want to meet your baby in. I closed my eyes and said, "I want sunlight. I want someone to say, 'You're doing beautifully,' in a voice that actually believes it. I want to hold my baby before I hear a single statistic." Joy nodded and said, "Then we work backward from there." She taught me to breathe in counts, to imagine my uterus as a fist that would eventually unclench, to eat protein like it was a full-time job. She came to appointments and asked questions in the polite but terrifying way Black women do when we've read the whole policy manual and memorized the footnotes. When a nurse tried to weigh me loudly in a hallway, Joy said, "We'll do that in a private room." When a resident called me non-compliant because I declined a test I didn't need yet, Joy tilted her head and said, "She's informed. That's different." At 20 weeks, we learned the baby's sex. I told the tech I didn't want a party or confetti or smoke bombs. I wanted a moment. She announced it gently. "It's a girl." And for a second, I saw my future pour into the room like light. Braids and barrettes, school plays, teaching her how to say no with her whole body, teaching her how to say yes with her whole heart. But joy lives beside fear. A week later, my blood pressure spiked. I felt it before I saw it. A strange tightness at the base of my skull, lights sparking at the edge of my vision like camera flashes. I went to triage, where they checked me into a bed and hooked me up to monitors that made my stomach lurch. My OB wasn't on call. A doctor I'd never met stood at the foot of my bed and said, without introduction, "We may need to discuss termination if this doesn't stabilize." My baby kicked then. This fierce little thud like a gavel. I put my hand over the spot and whispered, "We hear you." I looked at the doctor and said, "Please call the specialist and my doula. We are stabilizing." He frowned, annoyed at my hope, but he made the calls. Joy arrived in 20 minutes with peppermint oil and a voice that turned the room's volume down. The specialist adjusted my meds, dimmed the lights, and talked me through long, slow breaths that felt like I was sculpting air. The numbers came down. I went home that night exhausted but triumphant. The way you do after you win an argument with the universe. I crawled into bed, turned on my side, and pressed my palm to the small planet of my belly. "They don't know us," I whispered, "but they're going to." The weeks after that asked everything of me. I walked slow loops around the block at sunrise when the air was kind. I meal prepped like a woman training for a marathon. I left a sticky note on the bathroom mirror that said, "Your body is not the villain of this story." When the fear got loud, I'd play the recording Joy made me. Her voice saying, "Inhale courage, exhale doubt," until my ribs remembered how to open. Folks still had opinions. Aunt Lila called with a prayer that was really a warning. A coworker forwarded me an article titled, "High-Risk Pregnancies and Hard Truths," as if I was collecting them like souvenirs. Even my boyfriend wavered sometimes. His love punched through with worry. One night he said, "If anything happens to you, I'll never forgive myself." I took his face in my hands and said, "Then don't let anything happen. Let everything happen. The appointments, the food, the water, the rest, the standing up for me when I'm too tired to stand up for myself. That's how you love me now." He showed up different after that.
Learned my medication schedule better than I did. Sat in waiting rooms with his knee bouncing like a metronome, holding my purse and anyone's gaze who looked at me like a problem to be solved. He rubbed my swollen feet without flinching. He Googled affirmations for labor and read them to my belly in a voice so earnest I had to cover my mouth to keep from laughing. At 28 weeks, we toured the hospital. I memorized exits and elevators, who to ask for and who to ask to leave. I packed my bag early with a softness I wanted the room to catch. Lavender lotion, a silk bonnet, a playlist of songs that sounded like sunrise. I wrote a birth plan that started with one sentence: "Speak to me like I am capable." The night before my third trimester appointment, I dreamed of water. Not the crashing kind, but the steady kind, rivers who know where they're going. I woke up with the taste of peace on my tongue and the certainty that my body, for all the names they had called it, was a river too. The next morning I stood in the mirror, traced the new map of me with both hands and said out loud, "We are doing this." Not bravado, agreement. A covenant between me, my baby, and the God who knits galaxies and tiny fingers with the same patience. I walked into that appointment with my head high. The nurse took my pressure. The numbers were good. The specialist smiled for the first time. Joy high-fived me in the hallway like we'd just scored in overtime. And for the first time since that first flicker on the screen, I let myself imagine the ending I wanted. Sunlight in the room. A cry like the opening note of a hymn. My daughter on my chest. And me, whispering into her damp curls, "We did it when they said we couldn't." I wasn't naive. I knew storms still gather on clear mornings. But I also knew this. Every day I'd chosen my child, every no I'd said to fear, had built a shelter around us that looked a lot like faith. I went home, put my swollen feet in a basin of warm water, and called my mama. When she picked up, I said, "I'm okay. Baby's okay. We're going to be okay." There was a pause, and then my mother, the same woman who'd begged heaven to be careful with me, exhaled a laugh that sounded like she'd been holding it for months. "All right then," she said. "Let's cook something. Victory needs to eat." So we cooked. Collards and cornbread and a peach cobbler that made the whole house smell like a promise kept. We ate with our elbows on the table and our hands on my belly when the baby rolled. And for one sweet evening, the future didn't look like a chart or a caution sign. It looked like us. Loud, hungry, alive. And I slept that night the way only women do who have wrestled with fear and laid it down at the edge of the bed like a coat. Not gone, but not on me anymore. The third trimester arrived like a heavy storm, slow at first, then all at once. My ankles swelled until they looked like they were borrowing from the earth itself. My fingers tingled. My breath came shorter every week. I started walking with both hands on my belly like a shield. But I was still working part-time at the school cafeteria, still smiling at kids who asked when the baby was coming, still dodging comments from people who meant well but didn't think before speaking. "Girl, you sure it's just one?" someone said, laughing. I smiled back, but when I got home, I stood in the mirror and whispered, "They don't know how hard this is." Every night before bed, I'd lie on my side with the baby monitor strapped across my stomach, listening to the heartbeat, steady, like a drum calling me back from the edge of fear. Then came the day the numbers turned against me again. It was week 31. I'd been feeling off since morning, head tight, lights too bright, sounds too sharp. I took my pressure at home, 170 over 110. I tried again, 174. My hands trembled so bad I dropped the cuff. I didn't want to scare anyone, but I called Joy first. She didn't waste words. "Baby, go. Now. I'll meet you there." By the time I reached the hospital, my vision was flickering like a bad TV signal. They rushed me into triage. Nurses moved fast,
Snapping gloves, hooking IVs, calling codes I couldn't decipher. My boyfriend, Marcus, arrived breathless, face pale. He tried to take my hand, but someone pushed him back. "Sir, please step outside." I could hear them arguing softly outside the curtain, his voice low and scared, their voices calm but firm. Inside, the doctor, another stranger, leaned over me and said, "We need to prepare you in case we have to deliver early." 31 weeks, I asked, my throat dry. "She's not ready. She might not have a choice," he said. That sentence shattered something in me. I turned my face to the side and started praying. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that shakes air molecules. "Lord, I need you right now. Not tomorrow, not later, right now." Joy arrived like an anchor in a storm. She moved through that room like she'd paid rent there. "Talk to me," she said to the doctor. "What's the plan?" He started listing numbers and terms. She interrupted gently. "Say it in plain English. She deserves that." He frowned. "Severe preeclampsia. We're stabilizing her blood pressure, but if it doesn't come down, we'll have to deliver." Joy turned to me. "We're breathing, okay? They're doing their part. We'll do ours." She rubbed my arm, whispered the same rhythm she'd taught me weeks ago. Inhale courage, exhale doubt. I followed, over and over, until the panic started to soften. Marcus came back in. His eyes were red. He looked at Joy, then me. "They said she might not make it, that both of you—" He stopped. I reached for him, pressed his hand to my belly. "She's stronger than they know. So am I." Hours passed in slow motion. Beeps, drips, whispers. At some point, I heard thunder outside. The real kind. It mixed with the machine hum and made me think of all the women before me who'd fought the same battle with less help and more faith. By midnight, the meds kicked in. The numbers started dropping. 168, 160, 150. Joy smiled. "See? She's listening." The doctor came back, surprised but professional. "We've stabilized for now, but we'll keep you here for monitoring. You'll be on bed rest until delivery." That was the first time I exhaled in 24 hours. I turned to Marcus. "Go home. Eat. Sleep." He shook his head. "Not leaving." So he stayed, slept in a chair that was too small for his big frame, one hand still holding mine all night. Over the next few days, the hospital became my world. The fluorescent lights, the squeak of shoes in the hallway, the constant beeping that never quite matched my heart's rhythm. Nurses came and went, some kind, some mechanical. I learned to read faces, who believed in me and who thought I was foolish for trying to carry this baby to term. One morning, a young resident walked in with a clipboard and said, "You know, if you'd made a different choice earlier, you wouldn't be here now." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "If I'd made a different choice, there'd be no heartbeat on that monitor right now." He blinked, then looked away. He didn't come back. But the nights were the hardest. The room too quiet, the machines too loud, my thoughts too sharp. I'd lie awake thinking about the baby's room back home, still unfinished, half-painted, crib leaning against the wall. I imagined her tiny face, her first breath, and whispered, "I'll get you here, no matter what it takes." Sometimes Joy would visit, even off duty, bringing peppermint tea and stories about other mothers who made it. She said, "Every birth is a revolution, Denise. Yours just started earlier." At 32 weeks, I woke up to sharp pain low in my belly. The monitor screamed. Nurses flooded in. "Contractions," someone said. Too early, too soon. They gave me medication to stop the labor. My body fought like it was split in two, the part that wanted to rest and the part that wanted to push forward. I cried silently, gripping the rails, sweat rolling down my temples. Joy held my face in her hands. "Breathe. Don't fight your body. Guide it." After hours, the contractions eased. My body calmed. I fell asleep mid-prayer. When I woke,
Sunlight was sliding across the wall, golden and soft. Marcus was there, holding a takeout coffee. He said, "The nurse says she heard 2 heartbeats, strong as drums last night." I smiled weakly. That's my girl. From then on, the nurses started calling me the fighter. Even the skeptical ones softened. One slipped a note under my water cup that said, "You're stronger than the numbers." Weeks dragged on. My body swelled, my patience thinned. But each morning, I woke up to that steady beat on the monitor and whispered, "We're still here." At 36 weeks, my doctor said, "We're scheduling induction. It's time." The fear came back, but this time it had somewhere to sit. I called my mama, Joy, and Marcus. "We're ready," I said. And for once, I meant it. When the day came, I dressed in my own gown, a soft blue one Joy brought me, embroidered with tiny white flowers. She said, "You're not a patient today. You're a mother." The room smelled like lavender oil and anticipation. The nurse placed the monitor on my belly and the sound filled the air, that fast, fluttering heartbeat I'd memorized. "You did good, Mama," Joy whispered. As the contractions started, the room blurred. Pain is a strange kind of truth. It strips you of everything false. I screamed, I laughed, I cursed, I prayed. At one point I shouted, "Tell me I'm doing beautifully!" And the nurse smiled and said, "You are." Hours later, when the doctor said, "One more push," I felt the universe tilt. I pushed with every piece of myself that had ever been doubted, mocked, or dismissed. I pushed for every "you can't" I'd ever swallowed. And then I heard it. A cry. Tiny but loud, angry but alive. The most beautiful sound in the world. They placed her on my chest. Warm, slippery, perfect. Her eyes opened just a little, like she was checking to see if I'd kept my promise. "I told you we'd make it," I whispered. Joy wiped her eyes. Marcus was crying too, a sound I'd never heard from him before. Raw, grateful, undone. The nurse said, "She's healthy, strong heartbeat, 10 fingers, 10 toes." I laughed through the tears. Of course she is. They named her Miracle on the birth certificate, but at home, we called her Sunny. Because that's what she brought into every room she entered, light. Recovery was not what the movies promised. There was no soft music, no glowing smile, no tidy ending where the nurse hands you your baby and everything painful just stops. The truth? My body felt like a battlefield, and I was both the soldier and the soil left smoking after war. The first week after giving birth, I could barely stand without help. My legs were heavy, my vision blurred whenever I moved too fast, and my stomach felt like it had forgotten what it meant to belong to me. My hands shook when I tried to button a onesie, my skin still smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender oil. The nurses kept coming in every few hours. Blood pressure checks, temperature checks, incision checks, a steady stream of hands on my body that no longer felt like mine. One night, when everyone had gone, I looked at my daughter sleeping in her clear bassinet and whispered, "I did this for you. Every scar is yours." When we finally went home, the world seemed too loud, too bright. The air outside the hospital smelled like real life, rain and cut grass and the fried chicken my mama had made for our return. Everyone said congratulations, but their voices felt far away, like I was hearing them through glass. Mama stayed with us the first 2 weeks. She moved around the house like an angel disguised as a tired old woman, washing bottles, cooking grits, humming church songs while she rocked the baby. Sometimes I'd catch her just staring at me, quiet and proud. One night she said, "When you were born, I thought I'd never be enough for you. Now look at you. You brought a whole miracle into this world, but it didn't feel like a miracle yet. It felt like survival." The nights were the hardest. The baby would cry, and I'd cry right along with her, rocking and praying and wondering if I was failing already. Marcus tried to help. Bless him, he did. But there's a kind of tired that love can't fix. Sometimes I'd wake up in a panic just to make sure she was still breathing. I'd hold my hand above her chest, feel it rise and fall, and only then could I rest. Joy kept checking in, even though her job technically ended when I left the hospital. She'd call, ask how I was eating, how I was sleeping, how I was really doing. One afternoon, she stopped by with a small package. Inside was a framed photo someone had taken the moment Sunny was placed on my chest. My mouth open in a sob, tears on my cheeks, my hands trembling as I held that tiny body for the first time. "I thought you'd want to remember," Joy said. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't beautiful in the way people expect baby pictures to be. It was raw, messy, powerful. I put it on the mantel, next to a candle and a small Bible, and decided that would be my altar. The place I go when I forget how strong I am. 3 weeks later, the doctor cleared me for light activity. I went back for a checkup, the same office where they once told me to be realistic. My OB walked in, clipboard in hand, and froze. "Well," he said, "you look better than I expected." I smiled. "She's better than you expected, too." He tried to chuckle it off, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He said something about how science always learns from outliers. I said, maybe you should start learning from believers, too. By the time I got back to the car, I was laughing so hard I cried. It wasn't anger anymore. It was release. The months that followed were full of small victories. The first time Sunny slept through the night, I woke up terrified something was wrong, then realized it was just peace. The first time I walked around the block pushing her stroller, the neighbor who once told me, maybe it's not meant to be, ran out of her house just to say how beautiful my baby was. Even the women at church who'd whispered behind my back now came forward to hold my hand and say, "You were right to keep her." But I didn't need their validation anymore. My proof was breathing, blinking, drooling joy in a pink blanket. Still, healing wasn't easy. My body ached in new ways, and my mind played tricks on me. Some days I'd catch my reflection and flinch at the stretch marks and the softness that lingered. The world loves to tell big women that our bodies are wrong, and pregnancy didn't erase that voice. It just changed its tone. But then Sunny would grab my finger with her tiny fist, and I'd remember. This body made her. Every curve, every scar, every pound of me was part of her origin story. One afternoon, while feeding her, I caught my reflection in the window, sunlight hitting my skin, my daughter pressed against my chest, and for the first time, I didn't see too much. I saw enough. Marcus surprised me one evening by coming home early. He stood in the doorway watching me rock Sunny, his eyes soft. He said, "You know, when they told us to give up, I almost listened, and I would have missed this." I looked up at him and said, "That's the thing about faith. It doesn't make sense until it's the only thing that does." We sat together on the couch, the baby asleep between us, the house full of quiet warmth. It wasn't perfect. Bills still needed paying. The world still spun too fast. But we were whole. A few weeks later, Joy invited me to a support circle for new mothers. I didn't want to go at first. Too tired, too shy. But she insisted. When I walked in, there were women of every shape, age, and story. Some had lost babies. Some had adopted. Some were still trying. We shared fears and victories, and the kind of laughter that only women who've bled and survived can produce. When it was my turn to speak, I said, "They told me I couldn't do it, that my body was too big, my faith too small, and my hope too naive. But I did it anyway. And now every time I look at her, I see proof that the impossible just needed a mother stubborn enough to try." The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone did. Afterward, one young woman pulled me aside. She was maybe 20, shy, holding her stomach like a secret. "They told me to end it," she whispered. "But hearing you, maybe I won't." I took her hand and said, "Don't make your choice out of fear. Make it out of love. But know this, love is stronger than fear every single time." That night, I went home and cried, not from sadness, but from the weight of knowing that maybe my pain had become someone else's hope. Months passed.
Sunny grew chubby and loud, her laughter bubbling like gospel music. She took her first steps at 11 months, straight toward me, arms wide, eyes bright like she already knew the path home. Mama said, "She's got your stubbornness." Joy said, "She's got your strength." Marcus said, "She's got your smile." But I think she's got something even better, our story. When her first birthday came, we didn't throw a fancy party. We just filled the house with people who once doubted and now believed. There was food, music, laughter, and a cake so big it leaned to one side. Before we cut it, I held Sunny up and said, "You see her? They told me she'd never make it, but here she is, standing, laughing, alive. That's what faith looks like." Everyone clapped, but all I could do was hold her tighter, smell her hair, and whisper the same words I'd said the first night in the hospital. "We did it, baby. We did it." And for the first time since this journey began, I realized this wasn't just a victory over fear or medicine or doubt. This was resurrection. People look at me now, smiling, strong, baby on my hip, and they say, "You did it." But the truth is, I didn't just do it. I became it. I became the prayer my mother whispered when she thought I was asleep. I became the heartbeat that once trembled on a monitor when everyone said it wouldn't last. I became the woman who refused to let fear decide her story. When I look back, I don't see perfection. I see 1,000 tiny moments of courage that didn't feel like courage at the time, just survival. Every morning I opened my eyes when the world told me not to hope. That was courage. Every tear I wiped with shaking hands. That was courage. Every no I said to doctors who spoke of ending things instead of saving them. That was courage too. Motherhood didn't arrive for me wrapped in ribbons and pastel balloons. It came in the form of IV lines, swollen feet, hospital lights that never dimmed, and prayers that tasted like salt and steel. It came through nights of loneliness, mornings of doubt, and moments so raw they stripped me down to the core of who I was. And at that core, I found her, the woman I'd forgotten, the one who laughs loud, the one who loves hard, the one who doesn't apologize for taking up space. She was still there, waiting behind the fear. When my daughter was born, the nurses called her a miracle. But I know the truth. We were the miracle. Because sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. They rise from the ground, out of women who refuse to give up. People still ask, "Weren't you scared?" I tell them, yes, every day. But fear didn't get the final word. Faith did. Faith that my body was not a mistake. Faith that my voice mattered, even when it shook. Faith that my love could outlast statistics. Now, every time I hold my daughter, I whisper the same thing. You were worth every doubt, every tear, every fight. And sometimes, when she's asleep and the house is quiet, I look at her little chest rising and falling and realize she saved me too. She taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it cries and prays and keeps breathing when everything hurts. I used to think I wasn't built for this. Now I know I was built exactly for this. To every woman listening right now, every woman who's been told her dream is too risky, her body too fragile, her faith too foolish, hear me. You are not a mistake. You are not weak. You are not broken. They might measure you by numbers, by weight, by charts and checkboxes, but faith has never fit on a chart. If you're standing on the edge of a decision that scares you, don't let fear speak louder than love. Love is stubborn. Love is wild. Love is the most powerful medicine we've got. I didn't just give birth to a child. I gave birth to myself. And if I could go back and talk to the woman I was, the one sitting in that doctor's office, clutching that pamphlet, scared and alone, I'd tell her this. They don't know you yet, but they will. And when they do, they'll call it a miracle. Because the truth is, I was never broken. I was blooming.
And I'm still blooming. Every day. The weeks after the first birthday passed in a blur of laundry, laughter, and late-night prayers whispered between bottles and bills. The joy was real, but so was the exhaustion. People love to celebrate the baby. They forget the mother still needs saving too. I'd taken time off work after the birth, but the money from my short leave had long run out. Marcus was still working double shifts, and I could see the fatigue wearing grooves into his smile. One night, he came home smelling of engine oil and defeat. I was sitting on the couch, surrounded by unfolded clothes, baby toys scattered like confetti. He sighed and said, "We'll get through this, I promise." And I believed him. But promises don't pay for diapers. So, when Sonny turned 15 months old, I went back to work part-time at the school cafeteria. I thought it would be simple, just me and a hairnet, sliding trays of food down the line like before. But it wasn't the same. People looked at me differently now. The whispers followed me, from the parking lot to the staff room. "That's her," one of the teachers said. "The one who almost died having that baby." "She shouldn't have risked it," another murmured. "Lucky she made it at all." I pretended not to hear, but I did. Every word. The cafeteria was loud with the sound of children laughing, trays clattering, and gossip disguised as conversation. I moved through it like a ghost, smiling for the kids, humming under my breath to keep from crying. One afternoon, during lunch rush, a young teacher I barely knew came up to me. She said, "You're Denise, right? I read about you. You're the one who refused the termination. I just wanted to say, you're brave." Something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't pity. It was awe. "Thank you," I said softly. That night, after putting Sonny to bed, I sat on the porch with my laptop, the cool evening air brushing my skin. I typed a post on Facebook, just a few paragraphs about what it really meant to be brave, about how courage doesn't feel like fire. It feels like fear that keeps walking. I didn't expect anyone to care, but by morning, there were hundreds of comments. Then thousands. Women from all over were writing things like, "I needed to hear this today. I thought I was the only one. You just told my story." I sat there stunned. My pain, the thing I thought would shame me forever, was suddenly a bridge to someone else's healing. So I kept writing. Every night after Sonny fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table typing by the dim light of the stove. I wrote about the nights I cried, the doctors who doubted me, the friends who disappeared, and the quiet triumph of waking up each day anyway. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't preach. I just told the truth. The posts grew. People began sharing them. Then one day, a woman named Celia messaged me. "I run a small podcast about motherhood and faith. Would you share your story?" My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't a speaker. I was a cafeteria worker who got lucky. But Celia insisted. "You've got something to say that women need to hear." So I said yes. The podcast recording was done over Zoom, me in my living room with Sonny babbling in the background. I spoke about fear, about being called reckless for believing in myself, about learning to forgive the world for misunderstanding me. 2 days later, the episode went viral. Suddenly, my inbox flooded with messages from women. Some I knew, most I didn't. Nurses, teen moms, grandmothers, women who'd been told, "You can't," their whole lives. One message read, "My sister decided to keep her baby after hearing your story. She said if you could do it, so could she." I cried for hours after reading that one. Not out of sadness, but because I realized something. The story that almost broke me had become someone else's survival guide. A local church invited me to speak at their women's gathering. I almost said no again, but Joy, who had become like family, said, "You better go. The enemy counts on your silence." So I went. I wore my favorite dress, navy blue with gold earrings that caught the light when I moved. Standing on that stage, microphone in hand, I looked out at the rows of women, each one carrying a story the world would never read. My knees shook, but my voice didn't. "I'm not here because I did everything right," I said. "I'm here because I didn't let doing things wrong stop me." The room went quiet. Some women nodded, others wiped tears. Afterward, a woman in her 50s hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. She whispered, You made me believe my story isn't over. That night, I drove home under a sky full of stars, the kind that look like tiny promises scattered across black velvet. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than my pain. But purpose isn't always glamorous. Some mornings I still woke up exhausted, still worried about bills, still fought with Marcus about things that didn't matter until they suddenly did. We were both learning how to love in a world that had tested us too many times. One night, we argued about money. He said, "You're always talking about helping other people. What about helping us?" I snapped back, "This helps me help us. You just don't see it yet." He didn't answer. He just walked out to the porch and sat there for a long time. When he came back in, he said, "I do see it. I just get scared that you'll outgrow me." I looked at him, this man who'd held me through the worst nights of my life, and said, "If I grow, you grow with me. That's what family means." We didn't fix everything that night, but the air between us softened. Weeks later, a community center reached out. They were starting a support program for high-risk mothers, free workshops, nutrition classes, mentorship, and wanted me to lead a few sessions. Me, a cafeteria worker, a woman who had once been told her best option was to give up. I almost laughed when they asked, but instead, I said yes. The first night, only 6 women showed up, but the next week, 12, then 20. We called it the Brave Table. It wasn't therapy, it was truth-telling. Women brought their babies, their fears, their paperwork from doctors who spoke in numbers instead of names. We prayed, we cried. We shared recipes for low-sodium meals and high-hope living. One woman, Tiffany, was pregnant with twins and terrified. "They told me I'd never make it past 30 weeks, she said. "I'm scared every day." I told her, "Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care enough to fight." She smiled through tears. I needed that. Months later, Tiffany sent me a picture of 2 healthy baby girls wrapped in pink blankets. The caption read, "We made it." Every success story lit a new fire in me. I started a small Facebook group for the women from our meetings. Within a year, it had grown to 5,000 members, people sharing resources, advice, prayers, pictures, and hope. And all the while, Sunny was growing too, toddling around the living room with her curls bouncing, shouting, "Mama!" like it was her favorite word. Sometimes I'd watch her sleep, her tiny hand curled into a fist, and think, this is what victory looks like. One evening, after a long day of messages and calls, I sat outside with Joy. She looked at me and said, "You know, baby, your story didn't just save you, it planted seeds. You won't live to see all of them grow, but you started something." I smiled. "I didn't plan to start anything." She laughed. "None of us do. That's how you know it's divine." She was right. I hadn't planned this. I'd just refused to stay quiet. And maybe that's the whole secret. When you stop hiding your scars, other people find the light in them. Everyone calls me strong. Strong woman, strong mother, strong Black woman. They say it like a compliment, but sometimes it feels like a sentence. Because when you're strong, nobody asks if you're okay. They just assume you are. 2 years after Sunny's birth, the noise of life started to quiet down. But so did I. The community center was thriving. The Brave Table had hundreds of women showing up every month, and people were calling me an inspiration. On paper, I looked like the picture of resilience, but inside, I was cracking. It started small, forgetting things, losing my temper over tiny messes, feeling empty even when surrounded by people. Some mornings, I'd stare at the mirror and think, I should be grateful. I had my child, my family, my health. But gratitude started feeling like another job I was failing at. The hardest part? There was no obvious reason to feel sad, and that made the sadness heavier, like guilt wrapped in silence. Marcus noticed before I did. One night after putting Sunny to bed, he sat beside me on the couch and said, "You haven't laughed in weeks." "I'm just tired," I said. He nodded slowly. "You've been tired for months." I looked away. "I'm fine," but I wasn't. The days started to blur. I'd show up to the center, smile for everyone, tell them to keep fighting, then go home and sit in the dark. Sometimes I'd scroll through messages from women saying how much my words saved them, and I'd think, if they knew how hollow I feel right now, would they still listen? One afternoon during a meeting, I was talking about self-care and suddenly felt my chest tighten. The room spun. I couldn't breathe. I excused myself, locked the bathroom door, and slid down the wall until my knees hit the cold tile. I covered my mouth to keep from crying out loud. Joy found me there. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat beside me, knees cracking as she lowered herself down. Then softly she said, "Even healers need healing." I broke then. I told her everything. The fear, the guilt, the exhaustion. "Everyone expects me to be this symbol," I said, "but I'm still human. I still have bad days. I still miss who I was before all this." Joy nodded. "Baby, strength ain't about never breaking. It's about knowing where to go when you do." She made me promise to talk to someone, a counselor she trusted who worked with postpartum women. I resisted. I told her therapy was for other people. She raised an eyebrow. "You are other people, you just forgot." So I went. The first session, I sat across from a woman named Dr. Lewis. Her office smelled like peppermint and peace. She asked me one question. "When was the last time you rested without feeling guilty?" I couldn't answer. She said, "That's where we start." Over the next few weeks, we talked about everything: the trauma of childbirth, the pressure of being the miracle mom, the fear of disappointing people who called me brave. She explained that trauma doesn't end when the baby is born. Sometimes it hides inside your victories, waiting for silence to come out. She taught me to stop performing strength like a show and start living it quietly. She told me, rest is resistance too. I started taking walks again, not for fitness, but for breathing. I turned off my phone at night, even when messages poured in. I let dishes sit in the sink. I stopped pretending my house had to be spotless for me to feel worthy. It wasn't easy. Guilt is stubborn. Every time I chose myself, a voice in my head whispered, "You're being selfish." But then I'd look at Sunny, laughing, learning, living, and realize I wanted her to see a mother who loved herself, not one who ran herself into the ground in the name of strength. One evening, while folding laundry, she came up behind me and said, "Mommy, why you sad sometimes?" I froze. I didn't even know she'd noticed. I sat on the floor, pulled her into my lap, and said, "Because grown-ups get tired too, baby. But tired doesn't mean broken." She nodded, thoughtful, then patted my face with her tiny hand. "You strong." I smiled. "Yeah, but even strong people need hugs." She hugged me so tight it hurt, and something in my chest unclenched. From then on, I started talking about mental health in my workshops. I told the truth, that some days bravery looks like getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, or asking for help. I told them how I'd hidden behind the word strong until it became a cage. The women listened like they'd been waiting for permission to breathe. One of them, Maria, said, "I thought I was the only one who wanted to quit being brave for a day." I told her, "Then maybe that's what bravery really is. Admitting you're tired, but choosing to stay." The movement started to shift. The Brave Table stopped being just about surviving pregnancy. It became about surviving life, the aftermath, the pressure, the silence. Women began sharing stories about anxiety, burnout, marriage struggles, grief. And we held each other through it all. Marcus changed too. He started leaving little notes on the fridge. "You're doing great. Take a nap. Don't forget to eat." He learned that loving me wasn't about fixing me. It was about staying while I fixed myself. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find him sitting beside Sunny's bed, watching her sleep. He'd whisper, "You know, she's got your fire." And I'd whisper back, "Let's teach her how to rest it before it burns her." Therapy didn't make everything easy, but it made everything possible. I started writing again, but slower this time, more honestly. My posts weren't perfect speeches anymore. They were confessions. Today, I cried while folding baby clothes. Today, I chose to eat breakfast instead of answering emails. Today, I was not strong, and that's okay.
Those posts hit harder than any speech I'd ever given, because the truth always does. Women began thanking me for saying what they couldn't. Some said, "You gave me permission to not be perfect." Others said, "You reminded me that I matter too." And maybe that was the biggest lesson of all, that motherhood isn't about martyrdom. It's about becoming whole, so your child never has to grow up thinking love means self-erasure. On my 39th birthday, I threw a small party. Nothing fancy, just a backyard full of laughter, paper plates, and gospel music humming through a cheap speaker. Joy was there, Marcus grilling chicken, Mama rocking Sonny in a chair, and a handful of women from the brave table who'd become family. As the sun set, Joy raised a glass of lemonade and said, "To Denise, the woman who taught us that surviving ain't enough. You gotta live, too." Everyone cheered. I blushed and said, "I didn't teach that. I just learned it the hard way." After everyone left, I sat alone for a moment, watching the fireflies dance in the yard. The air smelled like charcoal and honeysuckle. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not empty. Light. Like I'd finally put down the armor I'd been wearing so long I forgot how to breathe without it. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you. For the fight, for the rest, for the lesson." And I swear I heard something whisper back in the breeze. Not words, but a feeling. "You're still growing." I smiled. I know. And this time, I'm not rushing it. It's funny how life builds circles. You start small, scared, shaking, whispering to God in hospital hallways. And somehow, years later, you're standing on a stage under bright lights talking about that same fear like it was just another chapter in your story. By the time Sunny was 5, our lives looked nothing like the chaos we crawled out of. She was thriving. Loud, curious, with a laugh that filled every corner of the house. The kind of laugh that made strangers smile without knowing why. And me? I was still working at the community center, but the Brave Table had grown far beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a handful of scared mothers in a folding chair circle had become a movement. We had chapters in 8 states, partnerships with clinics, doulas, and nonprofits. Women were organizing fundraisers, sending care packages to new moms, building networks of support where none existed before. One day, I got an email that changed everything. Subject line: "Feature opportunity, the Today Show." At first, I thought it was spam. But when I opened it, it said, "We've been following your work with the Brave Table and your story of surviving a high-risk pregnancy. We'd love to invite you for an interview next month." I sat there staring at the screen, coffee cooling in my hand. For a long time, I didn't move. I thought about that scared woman lying in the hospital bed at 31 weeks, praying for another heartbeat. And now here I was, being asked to tell that story to millions. When I told Marcus, he smiled so wide I thought his face might split. "You ready for that kind of spotlight?" I shrugged. "Maybe not, but I think the story is." Joy cried when I told her. "Baby, you better let the world see what faith can do." So I did. The day of the interview, I wore a deep green dress, the same color as the gown I'd dreamed of wearing when I was pregnant. The studio lights were hot, the air buzzing with cameras and cables. When the host introduced me, she said, "Today we're joined by Denise Harper, founder of the Brave Table, a national support network for women facing high-risk pregnancies. Denise, your story is incredible." I smiled. "It's God's story. I just lived it out loud." We talked about the pregnancy, the pain, the birth, the depression, the movement. I tried to keep it real, not polished, not rehearsed, just honest. I said, "We need to stop treating women's pain like it's invisible. We need to believe them when they say they're scared, and support them when they say they're strong." When the interview aired, my phone exploded. Thousands of messages poured in. Women from around the world, Brazil, Nigeria, the Philippines, Germany, wrote to say, "You told my story." That night, I sat with Sunny on my lap, scrolling through messages,
and she said, "Mommy, are those all your friends?" I laughed. "Kind of, baby. They're people who needed to hear that we're not alone." She nodded thoughtfully. "You're like a helper for moms." I kissed her forehead. Exactly that. The next few months were a whirlwind. A publisher reached out about writing a book. I didn't want to at first. Who was I to write a book? But Joy said, "You already wrote it in your heart. Now put it on paper." So I did. It took a year of late nights, early mornings, and too much coffee. I wrote everything: the ugly, the raw, the miraculous. I didn't write to be famous. I wrote to leave proof. Proof that women like me existed, fought, and won. When the book came out, Born Anyway, the story of faith and fight, it hit harder than I expected. Book clubs read it, hospitals invited me to speak, and women started carrying it into appointments like a shield. One doctor wrote me privately, "I used to think I was helping when I told my patients to give up. I don't anymore. Your book changed the way I practice." That message broke me open. Because that's what I'd prayed for. Not fame, not money, but change. A few months later, the Brave Table held its first national conference. Hundreds of women flew in from everywhere: nurses, single moms, survivors, daughters. The room was a sea of color, laughter, and tears. The kind of energy that hums under your skin like a living thing. When I walked onto that stage, the crowd stood. Not for me, but for themselves. For every story that deserved to be told. I looked at them and said, "They told us our bodies were too much. Our dreams were too heavy. Our faith was too naive. But here we are, alive, loud, and unashamed." The room erupted, and in the front row, I saw my mama wiping her eyes, Joy grinning like she'd known this was coming all along, and Marcus holding Sunny, who waved at me like I was on TV. After the conference, a young reporter pulled me aside. She said, "You've become a symbol for so many. What does strength mean to you now?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Strength used to mean surviving. Now it means letting yourself rest in between miracles." She smiled. "That's beautiful." "It's true," I said, "because miracles are heavy too. You gotta breathe between them." That night, when I got home, I tucked Sunny into bed. She looked up at me and asked, "Mommy, why do people always want to hear your story?" I brushed her curls and said, "Because every time I tell it, someone remembers they have their own." She smiled. "Then tell it forever." Out on the porch later, the night was quiet, the sky thick with stars. I thought about everything that had happened, from that first flicker on the ultrasound to this moment of peace. My life hadn't been easy, but it was honest. And maybe that's the best any of us can ask for. Sometimes people still stop me on the street. They say, "You're that woman who almost didn't make it." I smile and say, "No, I'm that woman who did." The first time I saw my mother's face on a billboard, I was 16. It was on the highway just outside Atlanta, her photo big and radiant. The words, "The Brave Table, founded by Denise Harper," printed in soft gold letters underneath. I remember pressing my forehead against the car window, whispering, "That's my mama." She never wanted to be famous. She used to say, "I didn't choose the spotlight. I just refused to stay in the dark." Now I'm 26, and the world still says her name like a prayer. Mama's gone now, passed 2 winters ago, quietly, the way she lived after all the storms. But her story hasn't gone with her. It's everywhere. In clinics, in schools, in the voices of women who start every sentence with, "If Denise could do it." And every time I hear her name, it feels like the world is whispering to me, "You come from fire." Growing up, I didn't fully understand who she was. To me, she was just Mama, the woman who sang gospel songs while folding laundry, who made the best sweet tea in the county, who kissed my forehead 3 times before bed because once is for love, twice is for protection, and the third is just in case. But to everyone else, she was something else entirely. She was the woman who defied doctors and statistics, the one who built a movement from her pain, the one who taught thousands of women that they were never too broken to begin again. I didn't know about the early years until I was older. She never told her story like tragedy, always like testimony. When I was about 10, she sat me down one evening while we watched the rain. She said, "Sonny, there are people who will tell you what you can't do before they ever learn your name. Smile at them, thank them quietly, and then go do it anyway." That was her entire life in one sentence. When Mama's book turned into a bestseller, I thought she'd finally slow down. She didn't. She said, "The work don't stop just because people start clapping." So she kept traveling. Hospitals, prisons, women's shelters, anywhere someone needed to hear her voice. She'd look those women in the eyes and say, "You ain't alone, baby. I know that dark. I lived there once. But I got out, and you will too." And they believed her. Because she never spoke from a podium, she spoke from a scar. After she died, I found her journals. Not the published stuff, her real words. Scribbled pages stained with coffee, full of half-finished prayers and gentle reminders to herself. One line stopped me cold. I didn't survive to be remembered. I survived so someone else could start. That's when I decided what I wanted to do with my life. I took over the Brave table. It was terrifying, filling shoes that felt like they were carved from mountains. But the women she mentored didn't let me fail. Joy was still alive then. Gray hair, now white. Eyes still sharp as ever. She hugged me tight and said, "Your mama built the foundation. You just gotta keep the fire lit." So I did. I expanded the program online, added mental health partnerships, created scholarships for doulas and midwives of color. We called the new branch Sunny Futures. It's funny, Mama would have rolled her eyes at that name. But I know she'd smile too. And every year, on her birthday, we hold a conference in her honor. We fill a hall with hundreds of women, doctors, nurses, single mothers, survivors, all dressed in white, holding candles. We play her voice over the speakers, a clip from an old interview. You can tell me I'm too big, too loud, too late, too much, but you can't tell me I'm not supposed to be here, because I am. Every time that line plays, the whole room stands up. Some clap, some cry. I always do both. People ask me if I ever felt pressure growing up with a mother like mine. I tell them yes, but not the kind you think. It wasn't pressure to live up to her. It was pressure to live honestly. She used to say, "Don't chase my story, Sonny. Write your own. Just make sure it's rooted in truth." So that's what I do now. I travel, I speak. I sit at tables full of women who remind me of her, tired, scared, hopeful. And I tell them what she told me. You don't have to be fearless to move forward. You just have to move. Some nights, after everyone's gone, I sit in her old rocking chair, the one she used to nurse me in. It still creaks the same way. I light a candle, read her journal, and talk to her out loud. I tell her about the babies born because of her words, about the doctors who changed their practices, about the husbands who finally learned how to listen, about the little girl in Detroit who was named Denise because her mama heard her story and refused to give up. I tell her about me, how I'm still learning to balance grace and grit, how I still struggle with my own fear sometimes, but how I always remember her voice saying, "Keep breathing, baby." And sometimes, when the house is quiet, I swear I hear her answer back. Not in words, but in warmth. Like the air itself remembers her. The world still talks about her miracle birth, the story of the woman who risked everything to bring a child into the world. But that's not the story I carry. The real miracle wasn't that she gave me life. It's that she showed me what to do with it. Because of her, I know what strength really means. It's not shouting, "I can handle it," while you crumble inside. It's whispering, "I need help," and reaching for a hand anyway. It's forgiving yourself for not being superhuman. It's choosing joy, even when the world gives you every reason not to. She taught me that love isn't fragile, it's fierce. It survives betrayal, fear, exhaustion, even death. And she proved that faith doesn't mean pretending everything's fine. It means standing in the storm and saying, "I still believe." When I speak now, I start every event with her words. I tell the audience, "My mama used to say, they said my body wasn't built for this, but maybe God built it for something bigger, to show the world what impossible looks like when it's done." Every time I say that, I feel her beside me. And when I go home after, when the applause fades and the lights dim, I hold my own daughter, her name's Grace, and whisper into her hair, "You come from women who don't quit." Grace will grow up never knowing the hospital rooms, the fear, the whispers, but she'll know the legacy, that her grandmother changed the world not by being perfect, but by being persistent. Sometimes I take her to the community center where Mama's picture hangs near the entrance, her smiling in that emerald green dress, eyes full of light. Beneath it, a quote carved into the wall. "Faith doesn't end with survival. It begins there." Grace always points at it and says, "That's Nana D." I nod. That's her. The woman who taught us all how to be brave. And every time I say it, I feel her heartbeat inside mine. Steady, strong, unbroken. So if you ever hear about a woman named Denise Harper, don't just remember the story of her pain or her miracle birth. Remember the way she kept showing up when she had every reason not to. Remember that her story wasn't about one baby. It was about all of us. Born again and again. Every time a woman chooses hope over fear, because that's what my mama really gave birth to. Not just me, not just life, but a generation of women who now know we were built for this. We were born anyway.